what's something I can put together in a short amount of time. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about my faith journey coming up to this point. You know, I share this with anticipation and excitement to learn about your faith journeys too. I think, you know, whenever you hear someone's experience with God or with the divine, it just I think broadens all of our perspectives about who God is and helps us ask good questions. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to talk about some major themes that have kind of come up for me on that journey, and then also talk about a few areas of theological interest that I've gotten to kind of pursue over time. So we'll start. These are my grandparents on both sides. My dad's parents over here. If you know Gratiot, my grandpa grew up at Gratiot Church, which was, I believe, a CRC church. You know, went to church, a lot of different churches growing up. They were part of a mega church for a while. That was crazy. And now my grandpa's in Grand Rapids, so we have kind of grown up having, you know, faith conversations with them, especially after becoming a pastor. My mom's parents are Romanian. They've got ties to the Romanian Orthodox Church on one side of my family, which, you know, is very different, very beautiful tradition. And they're currently at a non-denominational church. They live in Florida. And it was a little funny. We just have fun talking about, you know, their church experience. They had kind of a not so great pastor for a little while, and so, you know, I'd tell them about church, and every time I was like, "Oh, that sounds great. Oh, our church would never do that." So, but they've got a great new pastor now, and they've been so committed to that church. These are my parents, Scott and Shelley. They live in Grand Rapids, where I grew up. Both were also super active in the church growing up. Both of them are Sunday school teachers. My dad has served on the elder board for finances and is doing so again this coming year. My mom's going to be a deacon next year. My mom also rings in the bells. My dad has helped with the youth group, taken them on mission trips, and has been there weekly. And my mom actually connected us with a program called Kids Hope USA at the church. If you're not familiar, Kids Hope is an organization that basically pairs mentors with kids who are in elementary school, who are in difficult life situations. Maybe it's poverty, maybe they've lost a parent. And so a pretty great story there. She led that for 10 years, and then it was about a year ago she told a story of how one of the first kids in their program, he just graduated high school as a valedictorian. So, you know, she was crying, I was crying. It was just like, you know, the idea that could have made an impact. So they've been a huge part of my faith life growing up. I mean, seeing them active in church, it made me want to, you know, be active in church too. I was just like, you know, this is what we do, and this is fun. And so, yeah, there's baby Tommy. I still love a good blanket to this day. I have two siblings. This is my brother Brian. We're just the best of friends. We have a lot of the same interests. He went to Calvin University, which is really close to where I grew up, and he now lives in Grand Rapids, works in Holland with a warehouse management software company. Is doing just great there. And then my sister Katie, she is in her sophomore year at Hope. She does all sorts of amazing stuff. She was a drum major. She was a competitive dancer throughout high school, and she's doing dance as a minor at school. She's going into pre-med right now, a biochemistry major, as if that wasn't enough. And yeah, she can do everything. And here's Jackson. This is our 4-year-old Morky. My parents said we'd never get a dog, but here we are. We love him a lot. So I grew up in Caledonia, kind of by the Cascade area of Grand Rapids, which is kind of southeast. This is Forest Hills Presbyterian Church, where I went to church my whole life. You'll see that the front is beige. It used to be a lavender color, which was very interesting and gave a lot of comments. But you know, you get used to it after a while, and it's kind of unique. So here's the purple. You can kind of see it there. But basically from a young age, I grew up doing church choir. I just really loved music and kind of found a love for music through the church. So, you know, I kept singing in the choir. I do chimes. I played piano, saxophone growing up in the church, and also attending and helping with Vacation Bible Camp. When I saw that First Pres Birmingham did Vacation Bible Camp, I was like, oh my gosh, yes! As I hadn't done it in so long. It's so fun. So just kind of grew up with a love for music thanks to the church. I would be humming in kindergarten, and other students and teachers would have to tell me to stop. So these are some great teachers I had kind of going into middle and high school. This woman on the side is Kim Rossi. And in middle school, she had a really great way of teaching that really made me want to keep asking questions and learning more about faith. So every month we'd start with a big question, what is sin? How does creation work? What did Jesus do for us? Something like that. She'd ask what questions we have, and then for the next couple of weeks, we would dive into like Bible stories. We'd say, well, here's one way you can think about it. And then afterwards, she'd ask, okay, so what do you think about all that? Do you agree? Do you have any questions? Do you disagree? And this format was super helpful for me in just becoming interested with the church, because as you see at the end there, the ability to ask questions and not necessarily think of things always in the same way, as opposed to just saying, here's your prepackaged theology that you need to align with or else you're gone. So it just made me want to ask more questions about God. It made me curious, and what made me want to keep coming back to church to learn more. Ashley Atkins up there she's done all sorts of stuff at the church. She does children's ministry, but she's also done high school ministry for a long time there. And she was one of the consistent people there in youth ministry. I went through about 4 or 5 youth leaders while I was at this church, which at the time was very sad for me because I went to youth group pretty consistently. But looking back, everyone kind of has their own kind of take on what should be taught and kind of what they believe. And so, I look back on it thankful that I got to hear so many different perspectives. Here's me as John the Baptist for Sunday school lesson. It may surprise you to learn that I did not grow that out naturally. Kidding. So here's just a youth group picture. So this is my friend Kenton. Kenton and I were very different from each other, but going into my freshman year, we were the only 2 kids in youth group. There were 2 kids and 3 leaders. You become friends with someone pretty fast through that experience. We're pretty different, but this is just a funny picture of him at the Disney store, the princess stuff. And then our sophomore year, this is how large our youth group had grown from there. So don't ask me how it was done, but somehow they did it. Yeah, no kidding. No, it's good. No, I got a good group here. So we'd go to this retreat center in the winter called Spring Hill Camps, which are on the other side of the state. Some of you may have heard of them. Theology is okay, it ends with an altar call at the end of the week, and they're trying to convert as many people to the faith as they can, which Presbyterians, we don't necessarily think about things that way. So I was in 9th or 10th grade, and I was sitting down, and they were doing this really dramatic altar call, big prayer at the front of the church, and I had already believed in God, so I was just kind of whatever about it, I was just all right, doing this again. And so I closed my eyes for a second, and I still can't fully explain what happened to this day, but I was transported to this place that was just yellow and very warm, and I just felt so loved, and I felt a hand on my shoulder, and for some reason that hand felt like God. It was a hand on my shoulder, but it was also a really big hand. It was really hard, so that lasted for a couple seconds, and then I kind of opened my eyes, and so, not having a history with narcolepsy or anything, I was kind of what the heck was that? That's kind of, I look back on that as kind of assurance, oh yeah, God, God is there. And, when I think about doubt in the faith, personally, it's for me just been less about whether or not God is there and more how do we learn from what God says? What is God, really trying to call us to here? Could never really explain that one. So I went through high school, I did a lot of music, I went to Valparaiso University in Indiana. This is a picture of their chapel there. This is the largest collegiate chapel in the U.S., to my understanding, and 2nd or 3rd largest in the world. Just a beautiful space, and you can see the inside here a little bit. It was really, tied to a lot of things at this school. I loved that I could do music as a non-major. Just had a great visit. So this is a Lutheran school. It was ELCA and LCMS at the same time. So a lot of my classes would reference this guy, Martin Luther, and some of his beliefs. I was a part of the Honors College, and there was kind of philosophy, theology, I can't speak, sorry, theology. Kind of had a focus on kind of theology and philosophy there. So I went through a lot of questions when I went through college, like what do I want to be when I grow up? I tried business for a bit. That was a quick no for me. I thought about music, but wasn't really interested in the careers. I tried pre-med for a year. That was not the move. I was trying my hardest and not doing great in chemistry, but I knew I wanted to work I wanted to work with other people, right? So this is a horrible quality picture, but the evening kind of looked like this. So I'm just going to throw that. So I was in the car with my dad, spring of my sophomore year. It was raining out, nighttime, and I was like, Dad, I can't do this major anymore. I got to figure something out. And you had to figure it out before your junior year, so pressure was kind of building up. And so my dad asked, what are some of the things you've really enjoyed doing at school? And I said, well, I've really enjoyed being a part of the music here and being in like band and in choir. And I've really enjoyed like helping out in chapel and like doing theology classes. And so my dad asked, have you considered becoming a pastor? I thought you'd maybe mention that at some point. And like it kind of hit my ear different. I was like, oh, that actually doesn't sound too bad. And so I talked with some pastors in my life. I kind of looked up what it would take. I prayed a ton and was kind of like, yeah, I want to, follow this trail, see where it goes. And so I declared a theology major going into my junior year, changed all my classes pretty much changed to theology and just immediately loved it. I was just like, okay, this is what I want to be doing. And as I kept going through school, it just kept being affirmed like, oh yeah, this is what I love doing. So from Valpo, after college, you go to seminary if you know you're going to want to be a pastor. So I didn't go to a Presbyterian seminary. I considered it, but I had a really good visit at Western Theological Seminary in Holland, Michigan. Just a really great community there, really wonderful professors. You can see this worship space, which we'll talk about a little more in a bit, but just had a great visit there. So and 45 minutes from family right in Grand Rapids. So that was a big pull too. So this is where I spent a lot of my time during school. We would do weekday worship services at Western, and I was part of a team called the Chapel Stewards, where you basically get to help people who are leading the service, students and faculty, kind of plan and their services, get them volunteers, figure out the music, which was super fun. And then also First Presbyterian Church of Grand Haven, Michigan. I did a 2-year internship there as part of my program, and also worked as their 5th and 6th grade youth ministry coordinator for a little over 2 years as well. This is my good friend Tom. I met him in seminary. He's one of many friends who was blessed to have really good conversations with about God throughout school. I mean, I could list, however many professors that changed how I look about God, but Tom was just a close friend that, had a pretty significant impact on faith, I would say. He was always kind of like a step past what I would say I was comfortable believing. But he asked, but then you wonder, well, what about, the area right before that, and just kind of opened up kind of the expansiveness of God's love to me and asked questions in that vein. So, another cool thing, like as I started like preaching more in seminary, I got to preach at my home church at Forest Hills. I became a pulpit supply preacher there, and there's just something really special about this church that you grew up in, getting to kind of return in that capacity. I stayed active in music. I was in the choir, I did bells. The organist, if you look up Jens Sid organist, it's this guy Rob, who he has made over 200 kind of compositions of like Disney songs and songs from cartoons, all on organ. And an immensely talented person, and this is me. I got to do a video with him on his channel, which was pretty fun. And then this painting, I don't paint. Don't ask me to paint, but this is just showing kind of like Pentecost. You could paint something while the service was going, and it was just a very like creative church, like a lot of cool kind of artistic ideas there. I guess that's going to be a blank slide. These are some pictures from 5th and 6th grade youth ministry. We had a lot of fun. The group, I love the part of youth ministry that's like, you're getting to hang out, just have fun, like check in and, be a support for these kids as they kind of grow up and learn about life. what was really tricky was when we had to sit down in the classroom and start to listen. I'm not much of a disciplinarian, and this group, I mean, they kind of tested me in that in that way. So, kind of learned through this experience, like there's lots of great stuff about this, but I probably want to, go into pastoral ministry ultimately. And thankfully I had Maddie right down here. She's also a student at Western, and was just a wonderful colleague and friend along the way as we did that. Great supervisor. She's the strongest 8 on the Enneagram you've ever met, if you know what that means on the Enneagram. So she's very bold. She'll speak her mind, and that was really great as we talked about things that were frustrating to us. But it was great. I mean, I had a great experience at this church. So after seminary, I was kind of like, all right, where do I want to work first? And I knew I didn't want to do like an internship. Like I wanted to really go into, jump in to being a pastor at a church. So I was talking with a few places, and First Presbyterian Church of Ann Arbor came to the seminary and gave a presentation about the resident ministry program. And I was kind of like, I don't really want to do an internship. Like I want to jump in. But one of the pastors there, Mark, his sister-in-law, Reagan, was in my class. And every other week, Reagan would say, did you apply for the program yet? Oh, Mark said he'd really love to hear you play saxophone. Hey, did you apply yet? And so the day before the deadline came through, I was like, what the heck, we'll go for it. And so I put in the application. I had a really good tour there, and was just like, oh yeah, this is where I want to be. So that was kind of the Spirit's nudging, it turns out. This is a picture of the sanctuary. So this is just kind of a fun fact. So during COVID, well, no fact about COVID is all that fun, let's be real. But, worship wasn't meeting. So what they did was they would give out these colorful pieces of paper to people in the congregation, and they'd write a prayer request down for themselves. They'd collect those and then give them out, and then they'd invite people to fold a paper crane while they prayed the prayer on the piece of paper. So these are all prayers from one member to another in our church that happened over COVID. So part of why I bring that up is if you see me in this stole, this was actually a gift from a Bible study that no update. This is a gift from a Bible study that I got to help lead, and just kind of reflects, my time there. And so if you see me in that, that's cool. There's also someone at the church who designed stoles and wanted to get into designing stoles. So we got to work together to design that stole right there. And so those are just a fun fact. If you see me in those are the story behind those. So the resident ministry program itself, First Pres Ann Arbor is about, we're looking at 1,500 members. They had 7 pastors when I got there. And by the time I was leaving, I was still one of 5. So that's part of what makes the resident ministry program so great, right? I was fully ordained, I was doing the job basically as another associate pastor, but you get to do it with a lot of other pastors. You get to see how different people approach the job. You can ask questions about that, of course, and there's kind of a weekly kind of lesson you get where you get to kind of explore something that maybe they didn't teach you in seminary. So for me, that was, thinking about church leadership and what that looks like, because my seminary had a bad leadership class. So we got to kind of focus in these areas, but we were still, doing the full job, and Nathaniel and I were fully ordained while doing it. So here's just some pictures from that. We were really active in worship. We got to lead Bible studies. I led a young adult group as well. That's us doing a game night. You can see the big piles of games in the back there. Pastoral care, teaching, it was a really wonderful church. And this is my colleague, Nathaniel. Nathaniel is the other resident minister at the church, and just became a great colleague of mine. I mean, the thing about Nathaniel is he is very bold. He will not mince words. Three times in front of the congregation, he called for them to have a more diverse session and board, which in a sermon is a very bold thing to say. But he always, that part of him I always kind of admired, because I was you look at our world today, we kind of need boldness sometimes, right? And thinking kind of our pastoral identity in that. So yeah, there was a lot I learned from him. He's still a good friend. This is us at the I call it the Christian Dairy Queen in Birmingham, because it says, Jesus, I trust in you, and has that little icon up above. So just kind of a little funny thing. Also a ton of retreats that I got to do and tons of connections at the church being a resident minister, which was great. So this is the PAM Worship Conference. PAM is the Presbyterian Association of Music, and they put this conference on every year in North Carolina. So worship leaders and pastors and all sorts of things convene here every year, and I just love this picture of these banners. They had a banner for different stories that the preacher would talk about that week, and so you can see God and Hagar, it is in that green banner there, and they kind of used that as part. So it's just really awesome. As someone who loves worship, it was just really cool conference about that. This was a really unique conference. So this was the Theology of Play conference. It was put on within our denomination. It was a pretty small group, but basically it was a theology and board games conference. So if you know me, you know I love board games. Pastor Mark went with me because he also loves board games. We were good friends, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But it's kind of talking about theology of play and kind of what. Are there things we're doing in board games that can actually help us in real life? So the answer is yes, spoilers. And then some cool music retreats too. So this was the Area 5 Bell Conference this year in Columbus, Ohio. 750 ringers ringing at the same time. It was one of the largest bell conferences, they were saying. So this is from the conductor's stand, which is 6 feet high. It's crazy. So just a lot of fun opportunities there. So the resident ministry program is a 2-year program. So I was like, where do I want to come next? And interviewed at a couple of churches, and just got such a good impression of First Pres Birmingham from even the first conversation. The AP&C was wonderful. They answered my questions. They were so excited to just be in the process, and they had a lot to celebrate about this church. Of course, meeting Pastor Lou and working with Pastor Lou in the back there was a big pull as well. So we filled the terms of call. We did the vote, and I moved here to Troy, and it's just been so wonderful so far. I really mean it. I feel so at home here, and I've just really been enjoying it. So here's some of what I've gotten to get up to so far. I got to be Joseph at Vacation Bible Camp, which was super fun. And then there's a mini golf event. I should have asked Lou for this. There's a picture of us doing the Titanic pose on top of that wood thing back there, which is kind of hilarious. So we'll see if we can circulate that, or maybe not. So just a quick thing about some hobbies that I've really loved. I've alluded to music before. Music has been one of the bigger, more favorite hobbies. I love going to concerts. I love playing saxophone. Like I said, I kind of found a love for music in the church, and have just continued to ask questions about how might this fit into my calling, and so I really love that. I was in Scouts in high school, which was also really great as a growing opportunity. Just taught how to kind of serve others without thinking, and so that was really wonderful. I really loved Scouts, and I'm going to connect with the Scout troops here as I think one of their contacts, which I'm super excited about. Just a couple other things. So there's playing some board games with my friends over there. I like cooking. Doesn't mean I'm good at it, but I like trying. Racket sports, pickleball, tennis, ping pong, paddle sports too. This is a picture from Jazz Fest this year, and then just some friends from Grand Rapids that I love going to visit. And then these are 2 different sunsets from Elk Rapids, Michigan. My family loves to vacation up there. It's our happy spot. I thought these 2 were kind of funny. This kind of, if you were there in person, it kind of looked like the world was ending on this day. The whole sky was just this kind of scary orange. And then that one, it's oh, hey, look, God's coming. Everything's good. So you get a pretty cool range there. So just some themes as I kind of reflect on my experience and some takeaways. First, the idea that perfect faith doesn't exist, that there's some level of comfort in mystery. Going through high school, my church never taught me this, but in my head I was just I have to know all the answers to be a full Christian. I have to not ever talk about myself and just serve, and it was really exhausting, and it was not something that found resolution until I accepted the fact that, hey, perfection like that's not actually attainable right now. Like God pushes us in the right direction, but until then we rest kind of in some mystery with God, and that's part of what's special about God is none of us can know everything about God, at least not right now. Even the word perfect in the Bible isn't consistent. It can mean a couple of things. We often assume that it means moral perfection, but if you look in Hebrews, when it says that Jesus was like made perfect, yes, Jesus was morally perfect, but it's also referring to like resurrected life. Like being made perfect is resurrecting from the dead. It can also mean wholeness or completeness. So we strive to be morally good too, but just to show like even perfect doesn't, we don't even have a perfect definition for perfect, basically. We'll talk about this more in a minute, but the idea that rest isn't just nice, it's a taste of God's coming kingdom. I was told at my first visit at Valpo that, you need to be a part of 6 student organizations plus Greek life. And I was like, shoot, if I'm not doing all that much, I must be failing college. And so I joined all these like smaller groups, and mostly like music kind of things. And like coming up to my junior year, I was just like more tired than I had been in my whole life. I was like, this is too much. And so there was a deaconess in my life, Deaconess Kristen from the Lutheran Church, who I talked with, and she kind of helped me see rest as not something to feel guilty about, but like actually like something good and needed in the spiritual life. We'll talk more about this, but yeah, it's just rest as value in itself, not just rest to work more, but rest as a valuable thing on its own. The idea that being called doesn't have to mean just one thing. I'm sure many of you, as you have approached your callings, have found that, your job or maybe your passion project is rarely ever just one thing. I mean, maybe for some people there is that one thing that God has just called them to place all their chips on that one thing. But especially in pastoral ministry, I'm just like, this job changes so much week to week, right? And so, is there calling in, helping someone pick up their groceries or giving them a hug at the right time or, a nice offhanded comment to them. It's not just the big stuff, but it's a way of living and being in the world that we're also called to. And then possibly one of the biggest ones that I'd say is pretty summative of my theology currently, that faith is meant to expand the limits of what's possible, not put God in a box. So this is not to say that faith can mean everything, but rather that God can be found in a lot more than we probably realize, right? So I have a friend who actually I called and she told me about this book she was reading, and was talking about the importance of surprise in faith, how Jesus' resurrection, part of what was amazing about it, and there's a million things that were amazing about it, right? But this person's angle was, humanity thought that they had stopped this person claiming to be God. And the surprise comes when it's like, oh, you can't actually stop God. Like, you can kill and torture someone, and that doesn't stop God. That's not even close, right? So it's kind of an invitation to wonder, well, wow, this is so beyond who I thought God was. God's love must be more expansive than I can ever even figure out in this life, right? I had a picture back here of my friend Vanessa, who she's right there in the corner. She's had a gluten intolerance her whole life, and she had some people who were kind of like Pentecostal tradition, like if you have enough faith, God will heal you, and if not, you don't have enough faith, kind of stuff that's a little frightening that I don't necessarily love. But they prayed over her when she was sick, and someone mentioned, like, Lord, free her from her gluten intolerance. And, like, she can eat gluten now. Like, she had a piece of cake and was fine and has been trying all these new foods. So that was an example for me of, like, okay, not that I'm going to go become Pentecostal, but, like, okay, God actually might be, in more here in more ways than we expect. So then the question is, how expansive can our love get to? Are there ways we can be surprising as well with how much we love? But the main point is God's love being beyond all of that. So just a couple of areas of interest that I've really loved teaching about. Maybe I could do a lunch and learn on them in the future if they don't blacklist me after this. So Western Theological Seminary had an amazing Hebrew program. The way they taught Hebrew was kind of like how they would teach a child Hebrew, but for adults. So it was, we were learning our grammar, we were learning how to form sentences and speak, but we were doing so with songs, with enactments of scripture, with these really funny object lessons. They had a little curtain that they'd throw like a stuffed animal behind. They'd be like, Tola'at Katan, small caterpillar, and then they'd throw it back, the curtain would rumble, and there'd be this huge caterpillar that comes over, and they'd say, Tola'at Gadol, look at that. So funny, but just like formed in me this just love of Hebrew, and so I ended up going to a camp where you learn to be a teaching assistant for this program, and so have really loved that, and have loved just like reading some scripture in the original languages and finding how many ways truly we can define some of these terms and how they differ from how we're maybe used to hearing certain passages. Another thing, so this is Dr. Travis West, who's kind of like one of the leaders of the program. He helped form it and made the textbook. I love this picture of him doing a little maze at a restaurant. But he recently released a book that I recommend for all of you called The Sabbath Way. And it kind of talks about, like I was saying before, Sabbath rest is meant to be a taste of God's kingdom. Sabbath is something that's important to us as Christians, not just the Jewish people. And this idea that, when we think about heaven, if we think about a truly restored creation, right, where all of creation is restored to God's self, all sin is no more, well, there's not a lot of work to do if there's no more sin, right? So it must be a place where we kind of rest with one another and rest in God's presence. Now, I'm not going to pretend to make a ton of claims about what heaven is going to be like because, none of us know for sure, right? But that seems important, right? If there's no sin, where is even the work to be when the end comes? So when we take time to rest, and not just rest, but engage with Sabbath rest, which is presence with one another, presence with God, presence to ourselves, we're getting a taste of what heaven is going to be like, is kind of the concept. And so Dr. West talks about this in a lot of really beautiful ways, but I'll just name one point that I really loved. He talks about Henry Nouwen, if you know him, 3 lies that we tell ourselves and that sometimes we kind of form our identity on. That I am what I do, I am what I have, and I am what others say I am. All of those are kind of societal, things that kind of push up against Sabbath, because Sabbath tells us, we are inherently valuable beyond what we do, beyond what we have, beyond what others say. We are inherently designed for relationship with God, right? And that presence with God is the most important thing. So the book just goes into kind of Sabbath practice, like doing a Sabbath once a day, but also once a week, not once a day. But also developing a Sabbath posture in life, kind of slowing down and being more attentive to where God might be showing up. So really great book. Also kind of have had chances to do a lot of creative worship and have fun with that. So I'll just ask right here, what do you notice about, what's one word you'd use to describe this sanctuary on the side?
Orderly.
Standard, stark, ordinary? Simple. Good. And what about the sanctuary on the other side?
More connected.
Connected. Flexible, yeah. So believe it or not, this is a picture of the same space in different years. So this is what Western Seminary's chapel used to look like. Very traditional, simple look. There's nothing necessarily wrong with it, you say, but you guys already got at some of the differences in these spaces, right? When you've got a church that's looking up like this, the pastor is up here, sometimes the choir is up here, it gives a sense that okay, all of the holy stuff is happening up there, and then us in the congregation are kind of watching it, and we're just kind of receiving it. A space like this, which we've actually incorporated into our own sanctuary here at Birmingham with some of those front row chairs, suggests, hey, look, the pastor is in the circle with us. Hey, look, I can't actually worship without seeing someone across the way and without seeing, the font, they put the Bible there and the candle, these ordinary things that remind us of God. So, these spaces contain very different messages, right? And so, that was one of the first things that got me so interested in like, how we worship, what the space looks like or how we form liturgy, how can it, say more? How can it express God in unique ways? So thankfully, imagine my surprise when I went to First Pres Ann Arbor and I saw, oh look, they have a modular room too. So we got to do a lot of creative kind of worship services there. You could change around the room to make like little discussion groups to talk about things. You could do an enactment and like have people like walking through like an aisle in the middle. It's just something I really love doing. I'm not saying that because I'm saying I'm gonna do anything super crazy at First Pres Birmingham necessarily, but maybe I will. Our definitions of crazy differ. Who knows? And that's a blessing of the animal service. That's the only real picture I have of a service like that. Theology of humor. So I did a Bible study on this. We read Steve Wilkins' book, What's So Funny About God? If you want kind of a really deep theological look into this is a great book, but it's still really accessible, and it's mostly really funny. Some jokes are just bad, but mostly funny. If you want like a shorter summary and some examples, this book by Howard H. Macy, Discovering Humor in the Bible. Most of the book is basically just examples of biblical humor, but it also gives kind of a couple chapters on why we look for it and why it's important. So just to give a quick rundown, theology of humor is kind of this idea that humor exists throughout the Bible, but it's really easy to miss. I mean, the things we think are funny today, I think of, we don't think dad jokes are funny sometimes, right? Or sometimes we do. I like dad jokes, but when we hear them, we're not necessarily like, oh, that's not always necessarily my train of humor. Humor is in the Bible, but sometimes we just don't see it because it's just so far removed culturally. It's also in the Bible, right? So it feels like it's butting up against something really serious and important. It's like saying if we find jokes in the Bible, it must not be that serious of a book. But Wilkins argues in the very first chapter of his book that the opposite of humor is not seriousness, it's depression. That humor is kind of this surprised, overwhelmed subversion of expectations in a joyful way. And the opposite of and there's something serious about that hope, even if it's fun. Whereas depression is, feeling despair about how things are going. So I could talk about this all day because I really love this book, but just a couple of signs of biblical humor as you're reading. The Bible, it is such a running theme that there are challenges and even sometimes mockery of the powerful throughout the Bible. So you think about King Saul, God builds him up to be this great king, and then David comes onto the scene. And all of a sudden, Saul wants to get rid of him. And one of my favorite, it's just this downfall of like Saul just becomes more and more buffoonish in some of his attempts to kill David. Like he's going to come kill him while he sleeps. But Saul's own daughter is married to David and tells him that. And so he puts a straw figure of himself in the bed and escapes that night. And then sure enough, Saul rips off the colors and there's no David. If that wasn't in the Bible, would that not be like a hilarious skit or something you'd expect to see in a funny play? The same thing with Esther. You look at King Ahasuerus or King Xerxes in that story. Everything that the king does is based on someone else's suggestion. This is the ruler of a nation, and he can't make any decisions himself. He's always influenced by either not so good voices or good voices in the story, which reading it at the time would make him a buffoon, like that you would laugh at, right? And so there was some level of solidarity when the Jewish people or just anyone in poverty would read these stories to say, look how their day is coming. These people who are ruining our lives, they're not actually they're not actually that great as people say. Biblical humor subverts expectations, but it's always on humanity's behalf. So, I think of the story of Jonah, where this is a book of the Bible. He's a prophet. God tells him go and preach repentance in Nineveh, and he runs as far as he can in the opposite direction, gets on a boat to a country to the other side of the world. The sailors hit a storm with the boat that he's on, and they're like, well, this must be someone's god. I wonder who. Let's cast dice and find out. And it lands on the person whose fault it actually is. The best part is God appointing a worm. We haven't even gotten to that. But it's always, nothing you expect is going to happens in that book. But ultimately, Nineveh does repent, and because they do that, they're saved from destruction. So it's, and you think of the resurrection too, as I was just saying, subverting our expectations. So whenever you see that in the Bible, that's a sign of a, maybe not always ha-ha humor, but just like, oh my gosh, that's amazing, right? Just this amazement at what we find. And yeah, it can, moments where you feel overwhelmed with joy, that would kind of be grouped in this category. All right, one more thing, theology of play. We're almost there, thanks for listening. So I love talking about this stuff, so I get wordy. So theology of play is, the way I was taught at this retreat, it kind of starts with the creation story. So there's kind of this idea that it implies that play and rest are our intended lives with God. We talked about that a little bit with God's kingdom, right? You know, in the story, Adam and Eve are set in the garden, and some people say it was a work to have to name the animals. Others would say, hey, you guys just get to relax in the garden, name some animals, chill out with them, like just have a good time. Just don't eat this fruit from the tree. And then they, of course, eat the fruit, and what is the punishment? Now you have to work. Now you have to live lives working. So there's some disagreement scholarly about that, but I just think it's so interesting that the idea that this was the original plan and that play was the original hope for humanity. If you step back even more, God creating the world itself is a playful act. If you've ever seen a platypus, as you see in the corner there, you don't create a platypus unless you're having a good time making the animals, right? So there's just this inherent beauty and playfulness in how God made our world, how God made, animals and plants, and how God makes us. There's this other point that festivals, were a key part of Jewish religious practice. They've still got these holidays that they celebrate each year. There was a book about actually theology of humor that mentions that, we often think of the give 10% to God as kind of our method for giving in that story, like keep everything for yourself, give 10% to God. He said, actually, the model is you're giving 90% to like taking care of yourself, but also people in your tribe. And the 10% was for the festivals. It was for the fun things. So I'm not saying that to pressure you into stewardship, although if you did end up giving more, cool. But like it was a set aside part that God called the Jewish people to have these celebrations and remembrances. And so, yeah, it's just, we talked about how practicing play is kind of like practicing faith. We talked about how when you come to, I'll just give one example. When you come to play a game with other people, there's something called it's like the circle of something. But basically, it's this idea that when you're sitting down at the game table, if I'm going to completely ruin Lori's chances of winning the game, she's not going to take that personal because she knows we're just playing a game, right? When you're trying to reconcile with someone who you've had differences with, you might say things that they don't like, and they might say things that you don't like, but you've got to kind of set a similar table where you're like, we're doing this thing together, like we're going to accept that there might be some back and forth as we're trying to, fix this. There's a lot of wisdom to be gained in how we teach games and the different kinds of games we play. Some games encourage our creativity. Some encourage us to, make teams with other people and work towards a common goal. Yeah, just a lot of good stuff. So that's everything I have. Thank you so much for listening. And again, I hope this presentation just gives some good connection points as I get to know you further. And I'm just so excited to hear how you all have experienced God in your lives as well. So thank you. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions they want to ask Tommy?
I hope you're gonna do some programs based on what you talked about. I mean, like Hebrew class. I wanna do Hebrew class.
Yeah.
I have Jewish friends that take Hebrew all the time and just go nuts.
It'll drive you
Complain
nuts.
about
I've
it
taken
bitterly.
Oh my goodness.
And the language is so beautiful. We had the rabbi come in and Seder tradition with us somewhere, and he sang parts of it in Hebrew. It just makes your heart flutter. You know, it's so beautiful. And I love languages, so that's my idea. Let's do Hebrew.
Yeah, if we find space for it, I think it'd be really fun. The specific class that we taught was called Hebrew for Regular People, which is just the best name. It's basically a distilled version of that class at Western, and it is not it's not about learning grammar for everything, but we will learn a couple of songs and some words, and we'll kind of do word studies on the meaning of certain words and kind of how we can apply that to our faith today. We'll also do some enactment, so pick your character now. Before and start practicing. No, I'm just kidding. But no, that would be really fun. I'd love to do that.
Two questions, actually. One is, do you have a favorite theologian? And the other is, when do we get to hear the saxophone?
Yeah.
Oh man, a favorite theologian. I really bounce around quite a bit. I mean, the thing about seminary is you're always reading someone different. Like, you don't really stop and smell the roses with anyone for very long. I've really loved Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I've really loved Luther, in part because he's just kind of fun to read. He's just a very sassy man, and just has a funny way of wording things. Yeah, I'd say those are two of the bigger ones, but. Yeah, it's a great question. I like Dr. West and the books that I've read too are pretty wonderful. And saxophone, yeah, we'll talk with Andrew and maybe figure that out sometime. It'd be fun. Might play some hymns or something. So
It'd be great.
it'd be really fun.
I have a comment. I've always been impressed with pastors that know the Bible. The Bible is just so hard for me to understand and to remember everything. How old were you when you really got into reading the Bible?
That's a really good question. It was growing up, we never had a specific, you have to read this particular amount for a class per se. So it's hard to point to a specific time because it's been, sometimes in the journey of faith, it's just kind of sometimes you're really into a particular story or a topic and you're like, I want to just devour and know everything. Other times I'm like, I'm just trying to keep my head above water. I'm just going to read these prayers and need to, just float on that for a bit. So it's hard to point to a specific age, but it's just been it's certainly been something I continue to come back to, I'd say, over and over again. And as I continue to grow in my faith, it's something I come back to with more and more frequency and consistency. So yeah, it was never, we weren't necessarily told to read it, but it was, yeah, it's just been over time in different parts of my life, I would say. So yeah, and more now that, I'm a pastor. But
Thank you so much.
Oh.
Oh, no, I just wanted to comment that, thank you for saying that you can find comfort in the mystery, of faith. I was raised Jewish and, became a Christian later. And I always find in Bible studies, especially when they're studying the Old Testament, they want definite answers, and things don't make sense and don't add up. And yet we struggle to find them, and when we're learning it as a Jew, we just accept it.
Sure.
There's mystery to it, there's tradition in telling that way. We don't try to find a definite answer to anything. And that is relaxing, more relaxing than trying to fit some of the older testaments into today's society, because it's never going to make sense to me in today's society. So thank you for saying that, acknowledging that it's okay that it's a mystery.
Yeah, no, thanks for mentioning that. I mean, that was, when we were taking the Hebrew class, we talked a lot about the idea of, within the Jewish faith, of midrash, of kind of, it means something maybe slightly different than what I'm about to say, and, ask a Jewish person to fully describe it. But this idea that asking questions of Scripture and thinking through different answers, and we tried to, as we were interpreting Hebrew, and we were looking at words that could mean 3 or 4 things depending on the context. Yeah. It's almost, it feels necessary to take some of that spirit of being willing to explore different options, like if it says this, where does that take us for the meaning of the rest of the passage? So no, thanks for saying that, and that's I think that's important for anyone studying the Bible. It's a crazy book. so in a good way, but crazy. Yeah.
You mentioned something, I grew up Catholic, so at that time you had the catechism, didn't know a Bible. And when I was Lutheran church, the first time I saw the King James version of the Bible. But as youth, I think one thing I hear what you're saying when you have these questions, that it's okay to challenge your faith as a youth, because that's somehow how you learn, and you ask the questions, because I think they have a lot of questions. And if you just say, no, you gotta believe this, and that's not the way to go. Am I reading that right? In that youth group, you could ask a question, and there was no right or wrong answer, and then when you got to the end, you had a whole bunch of questions still? Would that be considering?
I would say that was definitely the approach that we went for in Grand Haven. Like this idea that we want this to be a safe place to ask questions. We'll give you some ideas and some things to build on and explore, but ultimately, it's, and part of it is respecting that each of us kind of makes our faith our own, right? I can say all these things about God, and that doesn't necessarily mean that God's going to mean more or less to you. Like it's your engagement in the questions about God and the faith that's ultimately going to make you interested in God, right? And then you ask, was it the chicken or the egg? Is the interest come first, or does the info come first? But it's I think that's so important as the approach that I received. We definitely tried to use that for Grand Haven, and the kids. I mean, when they were able to focus, they had questions that blew me away. Like I learned so much from that group.
I'd like everyone to know that Nancy Bailey did all the setup today.
Oh, wow.
None of her helpers